Each of these candidates is vying to replace Senator Bob Menendez in the upcoming election and represent the more than 9 million residents of our state. These press briefings offer a chance to learn more about their diverse backgrounds and contrasting views on policy and economic issues. Thanks again to Larry Hamm and to all of you for joining us today. Before we start, just a few quick reminders. Today's event is being recorded, and a recording and a transcript will be shared with everyone in attendance today. Also, we'll have Q&A towards the end of the event or after remarks from Larry Hamm. We ask that you please drop your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them over the course of the event today. And now I'll turn it over to Anthony Oni Advincula, our moderator for today's event.
Thank you very much, Cassandra, and welcome again, everyone, to the second part of this press briefing series with New Jersey senatorial candidates. My name is Anthony Advincula, coordinator of ethnic media initiatives at the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University, and I am your moderator today. Our speaker today is no stranger to politics. This is also not the first time that he's running for U.S. Senator. In 2020, Lawrence Hamm ran for U.S. Senator in the New Jersey Democratic primary election against Senator Cory Booker. For over 50 years, Larry has been an advocate for African Americans, the cause of human rights and civil rights for all oppressed people in the state and across the country. He grew up in Newark, New Jersey. When he was appointed to the Newark Board of Education, he was at the time the youngest voting school board member in the history of the United States. At the age of 20, Larry was also the youngest person to ever qualify as a candidate for councilman in the city of Newark. He graduated with honors from Princeton University in 1978, and currently he is the chairman of the People's Organization for Progress, a statewide independent grassroots organization that he founded. So let's welcome New Jersey senatorial candidate Lawrence Larry Hamm.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I am a lifetime resident of New Jersey. I grew up in Newark. I'm a product of Newark Public Schools, South 17th Street School and Arts High School. And it was in my senior year, 1971, that I led my first social justice action. At that time, I was the leader of the student government at Arts High School, and we had some concerns about education. So we organized a walkout, a march downtown, and a sit-in in March of 1971. It was during that sit-in that I met the mayor of Newark, the first African-American mayor, Kenneth A. Gibson. And it was on July 1st, 1971, that he appointed me to a 3-year term to the Newark Board of Education. I had been accepted at Princeton, but I left Princeton in the fall of 71 to return to Newark and complete my 3-year school board term. As was mentioned, at the end of my school board term, I ran for city council and was the youngest candidate. I did not win, but I returned to Princeton University in 1974. While at Princeton, I was the leader of the anti-apartheid movement. That is the anti-apartheid movement for the liberation of Southern Africa and South Africa in particular, because there's an anti-apartheid movement going on right now. Students are protesting right now Israeli apartheid at Princeton University as we speak. But then we were protesting against Princeton's investments in companies that were doing business with the racist white minority South African regime. And after several years of protests, particularly in my senior year, after 66 days of consecutive protests, we took over Nassau Hall on April 14th, 1978, and Princeton did divest from 3 major corporations that were doing business with South Africa. I eventually returned to Newark. I ran and was elected as a district leader, and of course, always trying to build a grassroots movement. I did it somewhat differently, organizing a district assembly in the 24th district of the West Ward of Newark. I served for district leader, and then I organized 400 families into a fuel oil buying cooperative. Instead of buying their home heating oil individually, those 400 families purchased millions of gallons as a single unit, and in doing so, were able to get lower than average market rate for their home heating oil, and also for the service contracts on their furnaces in their homes. And then after that, in 1981, together with others, we founded the People's Organization for Progress, which was up and running by 1982. And this year would mark the 42nd anniversary of that all-volunteer grassroots organization that works for racial, social, economic justice, and peace. During the 1980s, I supported the presidential campaigns of Reverend Jesse Jackson, his 1984 campaign, and during his 1988 campaign, I was state co-chair of the Jesse Jackson campaign in New Jersey, and by 1989 had also organized a chapter of the National Rainbow Coalition for the state of New Jersey. The struggle against apartheid continued, and through the People's Organization for Progress, Rainbow Coalition, and other organizations, we pressured the state of New Jersey to divest its pension funds from companies doing business with South Africa. And after much protest, that was successful, and the state of New Jersey did divest. During the 1990s, of course, we were involved in various struggles, just about all the major issues: housing, education, healthcare, police brutality, jobs, etc., involved in various struggles during the 90s. But during that time, I was also state chairman of the Million Man March in New Jersey, and helped to mobilize more than 75,000 men out of New Jersey to attend the Million Man March. Also in the 1990s, we were involved in various struggles against police brutality, including probably the most well-known case, that of Earl Faison, who was killed by police in Orange, New Jersey. And after several years of protest, 5 officers were convicted in connection with that case. It's the only case in the history of New Jersey where 5 officers were simultaneously charged and ultimately convicted in connection with a police brutality case. More recently, in 2016, when Bernie Sanders ran for president, I supported Bernie Sanders and ended up being a delegate for Bernie Sanders to the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. This was not the first time I was a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. I was a delegate for Jesse Jackson in 1988 to the Democratic National Convention in Atlanta. But in 2016, I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders to the Democratic National Convention that was held in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and supported Bernie's campaign until he did not get the nomination in 2016, but announced his support for the Democratic Party nominee. And so I supported Bernie Sanders through his campaign in 2016. In 2020, I was the state chairman of Bernie Sanders' campaign in New Jersey. And as was said in the introduction, I also ran for United States Senate against Cory Booker, I received almost 119,000 votes during that race. And here we are now in 2024. I'm once again running for United States Senate. I can't say I'm running against the incumbent, because the incumbent who was charged with corruption and also being a foreign agent for the Egyptian government, and first announced that he was stepping down as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and had also very recently announced that he is not running for re-election. So right now, I'm running in the New Jersey Democratic primary for United States Senate against Andy Kim and Patricia Campos Medina. And I'll stop there because I think people would like to ask questions.
Right. So thank you for those wonderful introductory remarks and giving us a thorough background of your credentials and wide range of experience in various organizing, community building capacities. To begin with this conversation with reporters, we asked this question to all the candidates, and we'd like to take this opportunity to ask you as well. Give us 3 reasons why you think you are the most qualified candidate in the senatorial race.
I believe that I am the most qualified candidate because I have been in the struggle for justice for working people, poor people, people of color for 53 years. That is longer than either of my competitors, I believe, have been alive. I have been in various struggles for jobs, for housing, for education, for healthcare, have been involved in various political struggles for civil rights, for voting rights, for human rights. So I think I have the longest record of experience. Secondly, I have been the most consistent among the candidates in our struggle for justice. My political life has been on a single vector since the walkout at Arts High School in 1971. And there hasn't been a year of my life since then that I have not been involved in some struggle for justice, for working people, for poor people, for people of color, and other oppressed peoples. And thirdly, I think I am the candidate on which people can most depend. Congressman Kim, when he ran for his first term, he said he was for Medicare for all. But since then, he has withdrawn from the struggle for Medicare for all. I am that candidate on which people can rely. If I say I'm going to fight for a particular cause, I'm going to engage that fight and I'm going to see it through to victory or to the end, one way or the other. And I am that candidate that's not going to sell out the people. I'm not going to go to Washington, talking about my progressive platform. And then when I get to Washington, begin to compromise on that platform. If Larry Hamm says today that he supports Medicare for all, I've been supporting Medicare for all since 1972. Can you believe that? For universal health care. In 1972, I was the youngest elected delegate to the I was the youngest elected delegate to the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana. And I was on the floor on March 4th, 5th, and 6th during the convention, voting for the progressive platform of the National Black Political Convention, which included universal health care, which we now call Medicare for all. Also, somewhat ironically, I guess, in 1972, I voted at the National Black Political Convention at Gary for self-determination for the Palestinian people. And 52 years later, I'm still supporting self-determination for the Palestinian people. I'm the first of the 3 candidates running for U.S. Senate that announced opposition to Israel's war in Gaza and denounced it. I did so in October not in November, not in December, not in January. In October, I called for a ceasefire. And today in April, I'm still calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. But more than that, we must get to the root cause of that crisis, and that is Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine. We must end the occupation. We must end Israeli apartheid. We must end the illegal settlements. We must end the ethnic cleansing. We must end the collective punishment, and we must end this genocidal war. So I think I gave you those three reasons as to how I distinguish myself from the other two candidates.
Thank you. Very well said. We have a few questions that they were posted on the chat box. So let's give them an opportunity to ask their questions. Let's start with Clyde Hughes. Clyde, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Mr. Hamm, thank you for joining us. I mentioned December in Middle Township. What? No, that was not December. That was during Black History Month.
February.
Just a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
First of all, without Menendez and without an establishment candidate in Tammy Murphy, is this the best year for you or progressive to break through in this race? And quickly, the second question, we just had the primaries in Philadelphia where the turnout was less than 20%. It seems like our presidential candidates, which is supposed to boost primary elections, are actually depressing turnout. How do you combat that to take advantage of what could potentially be a historic primary?
Well, first of all, and I may call on you to repeat your questions, but the first part of your question was about there not being an establishment candidate. There is an establishment candidate. His name is Congressman Kim, Andy Kim. He's an establishment candidate. The fight, this is my opinion now, the fight between he and Tammy Murphy was a clubhouse fight. They were both establishment candidates, and he happened to be the one that prevailed. How can Andy Kim be anything other than a candidate, having raised now probably close to $10 million for this race? How could he be a progressive candidate when he accepts donations from corporations, from banks, from lobbying groups? I mean, he is an established candidate. I mean, if for no other reason, he is a three-term incumbent. Now, does he have positive positions on some issues? Yes. He and I were in a debate or discussion on NJTV. We recorded earlier this week, and we happened to agree on opposing the ban against TikTok. That was an issue on which we agreed. But beyond that, he says he's for ceasefire in Gaza. Now he says that. He didn't say that in October. He didn't say it in November. In fact, I can't remember him actually saying it until maybe in April. Now, he says he said it before April, but I can't recall hearing him say it. But we know that that was not his initial position. But here's the rub. How can you be for a ceasefire and vote to send $25 more billion to Israel? Make it make sense. If you want a ceasefire, why would you continue to fund more bombs, more arms, more weapons, and more instruments of war to that war in Gaza, which the International Court of Justice says may be a plausible case for genocide? As you know, South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice in an almost unanimous decision. 17 judges, with only one judge dissenting, said there's a plausible case for genocide and that the case should proceed. But Andy Kim voted for more billions for the war in Gaza, which it's clear now that the American people oppose the war. All the polls show people want a ceasefire. And when they say they want it now, they want a ceasefire in the future, they want a ceasefire now. 34,000 people have been killed. 14,000 of them are children, 10,000 are women, 19,000 orphans, 1.1 million people displaced, 80% of the homes destroyed, all of the universities destroyed, every hospital destroyed. And now they found mass graves where people had their hands tied behind their backs and were shot and killed and put in these mass graves. It's awful. So I don't think Mr. Kim, is necessarily wearing should be wearing the mantle of a progressive in this regard. Now, in terms of is this the year for progressives to win? I'm on the ballot now. It's almost a non sequitur, right? Kim's on the ballot. Medina Campos is on the ballot. Larry Hamm is on the ballot. I'm not withdrawing from the race. I'm going forward to June the 4th, and come what may. And this is the difference between me and the others. I was in the fight for justice before I decided to be a candidate. In 20, you can look back at 48 years of activity before I decided to run for Senate in 20. And when this election is over, I'm still going to be fighting for justice, holding those accountable who are in power.
Larry, we have 7 questions in the pipeline, and we really want to cover all of them.
Okay,
so
I'll try to give shorter answers.
Yeah, let's give a chance. Raymond Tyler, who is in Atlantic City, to answer his question.
Yes, sir. Good to see you again, brother Larry.
Good to see you too,
future congressman. I have to be honest. It's hard for me to stay neutral. Brother Larry Hamm is one of the reasons why I haven't left the good fight.
All right.
I was in Newark. I was in Newark working for Visions Weekly.
Yes.
When the police brutality, when one of the police brutality cases came down, I actually left a rally held by Amiri Baraka to go cover your event, and you got me fired up.
All right.
But here's my question. I want to make it plain. If once elected, I have no doubt that social justice will change for the better under a Larry Hamm congressional seat. But do you have a plan to address lack of housing for those who are unhoused and affordable housing for the rest of us who are crippled by rent being $2,000, $3,000 for the most modest places?
Yes. First and foremost, we must introduce legislation that recognizing housing as a human right in the United States of America. Right now, we see housing as a profit center. If you proceed from that basis, then you support the idea that only people who can afford housing can have it. The United States should catch up to its peers, other advanced industrial capitalist countries, and see housing as a human right and the provision of housing to all of its citizens. We need to declare a national housing emergency to end homelessness in the United States of America. Some economists estimate that we could end. There are approximately 500,000 homeless people in the United States today. This is a disgrace. In the wealthiest country in the world, some economists estimate with as much as maybe $25 billion, we could eliminate homelessness in the United States of America. So that's thing one, that we should appropriate funds, establish a program to end homelessness in America, recognize housing as a human right. Thirdly, the government must re-enter the housing market. Remember, the government of the United States of America got into the housing business during the Great Depression. That's why we had public, what the people call the projects. But why do they call them projects? Because, in fact, they were projects of the US government to house people during the Great Depression. And this continued after World War II. But it was during the Reagan administration that Ronald Reagan severely, in a most draconian way, all but eliminated federal housing programs in the United States of America. He essentially got the US government out of the business of constructing housing. We need to get back in that business because many economists estimate that the United States right now is some 2 million units behind where we should be in the housing market. And this in turn is creating inflationary pressure on housing and driving up the cost of housing, because when there's less of a resource, people do what? They charge more for it. So we need to build housing. We need a national housing construction program. This would serve two purposes. One, to provide decent, affordable housing for people that need it. And two, it could be a component part of a national jobs program to put folks to work at jobs at a living wage. This is essential. The other thing is that we need to change the formula for how affordability is calculated. Right now, affordability is calculated based on an average market rate, the going rate in the market at the low end. But we all of us on this call know that what some folks call affordable is unaffordable for most people, you know? So what we need to do is move away from formulas that compute or base affordability on market rate and move to calculating based on the area mean income. So for instance, if we have a developer coming to a city and he says, I want to build housing, and we say yes, we say 25% of your units or more have to be devoted to affordable rate. And he says, okay, let me see what the affordability rate is in the market. We say, no, you calculate affordability based on the mean income of the people in the neighborhood in which you're constructing the housing, so that the people who live in the neighborhood could afford to live in that house. Because what we have now is gentrification, and gentrification is a national problem all over this country. It is displacing people, driving people out of their neighborhoods, out of cities. People are leaving New York City, coming to New Jersey, and New Jersey people are leaving New Jersey. So some of the things, those are some things. And then we must have rent control, and we must have federal legislation that will back up rent control. Landlords have been fighting to eliminate rent control in this country, and they have been successful to a degree. But we have to have rent control, because if you don't, as we see now, the cost of housing is going to skyrocket, and it's going to be more than people can afford, and it's just going to drive up the numbers of homeless people. So those are some of the things that I would do to try to bring about more affordable housing in the United States. There must be federal legislation to support it. Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for addressing that affordable housing issue. Some of these questions that will be asked are community specific, so let's go to Clybel Mercano, who is the editor of Spanish language publication, one of the largest in the state. So Clybel, ask away.
Hi, how are you? My
Fine,
question
you.
is about immigration. I would like to know, what is your position about immigration? Do you have any plan to help people, not only people who coming to the border, is also the people who live in here that have many years. Some people have 10, 20 years, and they don't have any plan, any option to get paper, to work, to be legal in this country. And
Yes.
right now, the focus is in the border, and President Biden talking about close the border, but nobody talking about the people who are already here for many years, and they don't have any option to get paper and to be legal in this country.
Yes. To address your question directly, we must have an immigration policy that is based on human rights. We cannot separate families. We cannot put people in cages. We should not put Constantine wire in the river so that people will be killed trying to cross the river. We should not leave people to die of thirst and hunger in the deserts of California and Texas and other places. We must recognize the human rights of immigrants. We must recognize and live up to those conventions of the United Nations that we have signed on to. And we must also recognize and live up to international law as it pertains to immigration. And we have not been doing that over the last decade or so. In fact, our government has been doing things in direct violation of conventions of the United Nations and of international law. So first and foremost, we must respect human rights. Secondly, I support DACA. I would support the DREAM Act, which is not yet passed, and the Promise Act, which has not yet passed. Both of these acts would make a pathway for citizenship for those who came here as children and were raised here, but in fact were not given citizenship. So as a United States Senator, I would either be a co-sponsor to, or if nobody else is sponsoring the legislation, I would reintroduce the DREAM Act and the Promise Act for DACA students. The next thing is, there are more than 11 million undocumented people in the United States. I support making a pathway for citizenship for those folks. And while we are doing that, I would support work permits so that people can work and make a living. I read recently, because I'm always, trying to study and learn more, that one of the reasons that the United States did not have the recession that many people predicted we would have around in the aftermath of COVID, in these recent years in the aftermath of COVID, was because of the contribution that undocumented folks have been making to the economy while they have been working here. So I would support providing a path to citizenship for those who are here, support the DREAM Act, support the Promise Act, support work permits so that people who are here can get work. The next thing is that the United States, and I'm going to say this, and I don't want this to be misinterpreted because, you know, it may sound like something other than what I'm intending. I would support declaring an emergency at the border. Why would I do that? So that emergency funds could be freed up to bolster the immigration apparatus and institutions at the border, so that we could clear up the backlog of folks who are trying to apply for citizenship and entrance into the United States. Our immigration infrastructure is severely underfunded. It's understaffed. There are not enough immigration courts. There are not enough facilities to help people. And I'm opposed to putting people in the jails as we have been doing if they haven't broken any laws. So there must be more funding for our immigration infrastructure so that it can process and clear up the backlog. And then lastly, many mayors across the United States have said, you know, they welcome our new arrivals to their cities, but this is creating a strain on social programs administered by municipalities. Immigration is a federal issue. Immigration is overseen by federal law. If the federal government is going to allow people to come into the country and come into communities, then the federal government should provide the resources necessary so those persons can be comfortably absorbed into the communities where they're being located. They should not be sleeping outside on the streets of New York City. That's wrong. The federal government should provide the resources. One of my fundamental premises is, my fundamental positions is that if the federal government mandates something, then the federal government should pay for it. And we have the money. If we would eliminate those tax cuts that Donald Trump brought about during his term, some $2 trillion in tax cuts, if we would eliminate all the money that we're sending abroad for wars, if we would cut the military budget, if we would establish a fairer system of taxation, so billion-dollar corporations and billionaires are not paying less taxes than the average working person, then we'll have the resources to do that. So that's some of my position on immigration.
Yeah, thank you. Now, here's a question that dovetails immigration, but specifically on racial justice issues in ethnic and immigrant communities. So there's a rise of population of Pakistani American in Patterson and outside New Jersey. So I'm going to ask Moshin Zahir of Urdu News to ask his question.
Thank you, Mr. Hamm, for being with us. And the question is about that how do you plan to address the intersecting challenges faced by immigrant communities, particularly regarding racial justice issues, and what specific policies do you propose to ensure equitable treatment and opportunities for all immigrants in New Jersey?
Right. Well, in terms of the intersectionality, there are some issues across the board that affect all people of color, be they Black and brown people who are born here, or Black and brown people and Asian people and others that were not born here. And that is the issue of discrimination. In 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act to essentially eliminate the racial apartheid that existed in the United States of America. And the Civil Rights Act of '64 was successful in as much as that the laws of racial segregation, or the laws that required racial segregation, were declared unconstitutional. However, the de facto racial segregation continues. Racial discrimination continues. In fact, all kinds of discrimination continue. And I think one of the reasons is that our Civil Rights Act of 1964 was weakened by subsequent Supreme Court decisions. So one of the things that I'm proposing is that we need a Civil Rights Act for the 21st century. We need a Civil Rights Act of 2024 or 2025. And I meant to say not an act, but a law. I think one of the weaknesses of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was it was an act. And see, most people don't know that there's a difference between an act and a law. When something is passed as an act, it must be renewed periodically by Congress. Sometimes it must be renewed every 10 years or 15 years. It depends on each session of Congress when it's time to renew. I think we need a permanent civil rights law that will outlaw all forms of discrimination against any person because of race, color, creed, nationality, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, et cetera, et cetera. I think we might need to look at the Constitution of South Africa, the new constitution that was passed after the fall of apartheid, because their constitution addresses that very well. So I think we must have legislation, stronger legislation to militate against any form of discrimination against any person because of their race, their color, their national origin, ethnicity, social, sexual orientation, gender, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's one thing that we need to do.
Yeah. We have 15 minutes more, and we have 5 questions in the pipeline. So let's give Kimmy the opportunity to ask her question, unless you want me to read yours. Kimmy, are you still online?
Yes, yeah, I can do it, Anthony. Hi, Larry. How are you doing?
Hi, Kim.
I'm glad I got the chance to hear about your longtime involvement with issues in the Middle East and Israel, because I didn't know that history. Yeah, I'm an Israeli citizen, a dual citizen with Israel, and I lived in Israel before there was a Gaza wall. I remember I was there at the time that the first rape took place in Israel, and you know,
Kimmy,
it was a
Kimmy, make sure
new
we
country.
drill in here and get right to the question. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but
I will get to my question. But this is my question. So, you know, the violence against Jews is exploding worldwide, especially in the United States. So when you say that you want that all citizens should be, or residents should be protected, and regardless of their national origin, do you feel that with the strong feelings that you have about Israel, which is a Jewish country, that you will be able to act impartially as a legislator to protect Jews as well as other people in the United States?
The answer to your question is yes. I'm opposed to anti-Semitism. I have spoken out against the attacks of the white racist domestic terrorists against synagogues, in this country. I'm an enemy of all forms of discrimination, be it anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, homophobia, misogyny, sexism, etc. So yes, I would oppose any violence or bias whatsoever against people of Jewish origin.
Thank you. Let's go to the southern part of New Jersey. Carlos Avila, please ask your question.
Thank you, Ronnie. Yes, Mr. Larry, I understand this topic is very important for us in Trenton area. We have, experimenting the excessive use of force. Police department, and this is a constant issue over here in Trenton area against the Latino community and also Afro-American people.
Yes.
So I hear that you are, working with other organizations to establish a municipal civilian review board, which was a pilot program in New Jersey. I would like to know if the legislation is advancing, is doing something to accomplish something for stop that issue?
Yes. At the state level, the legislation is advancing. For years, in New Jersey, in Newark in particular, since 1960, people had been demanding police review boards with subpoena powers. It took until 2014 for Newark to get a police review board that the mayor had organized in such a way, placing the city ombudsman on that board so that he could use his subpoena power in that regard. What happened was the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge number 12, went into state superior court to stop it. They won at the superior court level. The city won and the police lost at the appellate court level. And the police went all the way to the state Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, ruled that the city of Newark could have a police review board, but only the state of New Jersey could confer subpoena power. So shortly thereafter, state assembly people introduced legislation that would enable municipalities to establish police review boards with subpoena power. For several years, we couldn't get the bill out of committee. Then finally, I believe it was the end of last year, 2023, a new iteration of that bill, which would allow 5 cities to establish police review board with subpoena powers, was released from committee, from Assembly Committee. However, it hasn't been released yet from the state Senate, so the two could be reconciled and brought to the floor of the New Jersey legislature for a vote. At the federal level, the George Floyd Accountability in Policing Act has not advanced. So the struggle for a police review board continues. Very slow and painstaking progress at the state level and little progress at the federal level. That's why I want to be United States Senator, so I could try to speed up the pace of change.
I am so glad that Carlos raised that question. It's a very important issue, especially in ethnic communities. So here's a question from Mark Tyler of Atlantic City Focus that came in through a text message. The question is, if you win the election, what are your plans for the next 100 days? And if you don't, what will you do to support the Democratic Party?
Well, if I win the election, my plan for the next 100 days would be to organize my campaign to win the general election. in November against the Republican candidate. There are 3 candidates running in the Democratic primary, which is June 4th, and there are 5 candidates running in the Republican primary. So we'll have to see who's going to be in the final round, in November. So if I win, then the plan is reset, start all over for the fundraising and putting together the organization necessary to defeat the Republican candidate in November. If I do not win the election, I will support the Democratic, the winner of the New Jersey Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. I will support that person because I believe it is essential for Democrats to maintain and expand their majority in the United States Senate.
Thank you. This might be the second to the last question, and we'll give Joe a chance to ask his multiple questions here. Joe, if you don't mind putting that all together.
Fantastic. So one real quick, you've already sort of mentioned this, so will you commit to rejecting corporate and PAC donations to your campaign and also of your presumptive tenure in the Senate if you're elected? Are you committed to rejecting or refusing corporate and the same kind of groups that you criticized Andy Kim for receiving?
I am absolutely committed to that.
Okay. So you mentioned a series of progressive policy positions that you've been fighting for decades: universal health care, climate change justice, racial equity. What do you think are some of the biggest barriers both in government and in the public sector to achieving those goals, and what are your plans to overcome them? What kind of strategies are you pursuing? Who are your allies and things like that?
Well, the biggest impediments right now are structural impediments in our political system. First of all, I want to say this so that people are clear. It is absolutely imperative that we defeat the Republicans in November at every level, because the Republican Party essentially has become the party of social retrogression. They want to go back, but we're not going back. We fought and sacrificed and bled for every inch of social progress we've made over the last 70 years. But there are people that want to take us back, and they speak openly of this. They want to take us back to the 1950s. When they overturned Roe, remember, Clarence Thomas said, now we can do what? We can revisit the Brown decision. Brown versus Topeka, Kansas Board of Education. That became the legal basis of ending racial apartheid in the United States in all areas of society, not just in education. So if they revisit Brown, they will essentially undo the legal foundation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So we have to have a Congress. And I don't understand some folks, they think Trump is their friend. Obviously, they're not looking at what's going on. I would refer everyone to Project 2025. Read that and read Agenda 47. Those are the documents which lay out what a second Trump presidency will look like and what they will attempt to do. So we must defeat the Republicans. We must expand the majority, that we must get the majority back in the House of Representatives. We must expand the majority to make it filibuster proof in the Senate. We must eliminate the filibuster, which has been used as a weapon to stop any progressive or social justice type legislation. Then the second thing is and of course we have to win the presidency, because Trump got to appoint more people to the Supreme Court than any other president. He got 3 appointees in one term, not over 2 terms, in one term. So if for no other reason, we have to get a Democrat in the White House to prevent the appointment of any more of these Federalist Society reactionary judges. And we may have to consider expanding the Supreme Court. I would introduce the bill. And if somebody else introduces the bill, I would co-sponsor it. Maybe we should have a 13-member United States Supreme Court, one judge for each federal district, because the damage that will be done by this court will be for 20 years. If that they have a super majority, they got 6 out of 9 on the Supreme Court. So these are some of the impediments. And then the most important thing is that we have to build a social movement for justice. We must have an inside strategy and an outside strategy. We must have an electoral strategy, and we must have a street mobilization strategy. Because really, without that pressure from below for change, the people that are in power will not move for change in a really diligent way, an effective way.
Here's my personal question to you, and I hope you can answer this in briefly, because we only have left. Yeah, you've touched on healthcare, affordable housing, racial justice, issues. But I was just wondering, what about federal minimum wage? Some states still get $2.13 per hour. This has something to do with the wealth distribution problem.
Absolutely.
What change would you like to do on this issue?
Let me say this, and people can go to my webpage and look at the major parts. My entire agenda is not there, but certainly the major planks are there. And among my major platform plank is to increase the federal minimum wage, which has not been increased for 13 years. But CEO pay has risen over 1,000% in that same amount of time. You cannot rent a 1-bedroom apartment anywhere in the United States of America on a wage of $7.25 an hour. We must have an increase of the minimum wage. My position is $17 an hour. We asked for $15 an hour 12 years ago. So inflation demands that we have to increase our demand from $15 to at least $17. And I'm not talking about a gradual, like I'm gonna introduce the bill's gonna be passed, but it's gonna take 5 years for us to get to 17. No, should be an immediate increase in the federal minimum wage to $17 per hour. And then we shouldn't stop there. Our long-range goal should be to establish a living wage. This is what Dr. King was fighting for, a living wage. People work 40 hours a week. They should make enough money to support themselves and their families. I grew up, I was born in 1953. I grew up in an era where a person could go to high school, graduate high school, go get a job at GM, General Motors Auto Plant in Linden, or Ford Auto Plant in Mahwah, and they could make enough money to get a house, to get a car, and to put their kid through college. We can't do that in the 21st century now. And this is awful. We're the richest country in the world, but it's like we're underdeveloped in the area of social development relative to our peer nations. I'm talking about the OECD countries.
Right. On that note, thank you so much, Mr. Hamm, and we really appreciate you giving us the time and opportunity to speak with you and get to know more about you. So